On a Monday morning in 1963, the fastest man alive stood in a field in the Scottish borders counting sheep. They were his sheep, and somebody had to do it. 24 hours earlier, he had embarrassed the wealthiest racing teams on Earth. By the weekend, he would fly out and do it again. His name was Jim Clark, and before this video ends, you will see the rain-soaked afternoon in Belgium when he beat every professional on the planet by almost 5 minutes. These are the 8 days a sheep farmer made the racing establishment look ordinary. To understand why any of this stung so badly, you need to understand what the establishment was in the early 60s. Ferrari arrived at every Grand Prix with factory money, factory engineers and drivers who were treated like film stars. BRM had the backing of British industry, and against all of that stood a shy farmer's son from Eddington, Mains, a family farm near Churnside in Berwickshire, a few miles from the market town of Duns. Clark left school at 16 to work the land. His parents wanted him nowhere near a racing car. He learned his craft on the sly with a local outfit called the Border Reivers, a band of enthusiasts named after the old raiding families of the frontier, sharpening his gifts in a Jaguar D-Type on airfield circuits between market days. Even after Colin Chapman signed him for Lotus, Clark kept running the farm, going home between race weekends to a world of ewes, feed bills, and border weather that could not have cared less about lap records. He never stopped being a farmer. He simply added a second job, and the second job happened to be dismantling the finest racing organizations in the world. Here is the countdown. Number 8, the first win, taken at the track he could not stand. Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium was the most feared circuit on the calendar, a public road course through the Ardennes forest where the fastest corners were lined with farmhouses and telegraph poles. Clark had seen the very worst of the sport there as a young driver in 1960, and he never made a secret of how thoroughly he disliked the place. So naturally, that is where he chose to announce himself. At the Belgian Grand Prix in June of 1962, Clark qualified only 12th in the brand new Lotus 25, the slender monocoque car that Colin Chapman had built light where Ferrari built strong. 12th on the grid at the longest, fastest, most punishing circuit in the championship should have meant an afternoon of damage limitation. Instead, on race day, Clark simply drove away from everybody. He carved through the order corner by corner, took the lead, and then did something the establishment found harder to forgive than the overtaking. He disappeared. By the flag, he had won by more than 40 seconds from Graham Hill. Phil Hill, the reigning world champion, brought his Ferrari home third and could do nothing about the farmer ahead of him. It was Clark's first Grand Prix win, and the first ever for the Lotus 25, and it came at a circuit he privately loathed. It was also the beginning of a streak that reads like a misprint, because Clark went on to win the Belgian Grand Prix 4 times in a row. The track that frightened him became the track that belonged to him. Remember that detail, because Spa is going to come back at the top of this countdown in a way nobody in 1962 could have imagined. Number 7, the world champion in a family saloon, cornering on 3 wheels. By 1964, Clark was the reigning Formula One world champion, and the establishment assumed a man of that station would spend his spare weekends resting. Instead, Ford and Lotus handed him a Lotus Cortina, which was on paper the same sensible saloon that carried British families to the seaside, a car with door handles and a back seat and room for the shopping. Clark proceeded to race it like it owed him money. His cornering style became one of the most photographed sights in British motorsport. The Cortina heeled over so far that the inside front wheel lifted clear off the tarmac. The world champion balancing a grocery getter on 3 wheels at racing speed. It looked like a circus act. It was actually precision. A driver so sensitive to a car's balance that he could hold a heavy saloon at the exact point of tipping over and keep it there through an entire corner, race after race. While fighting a full Formula One season against Ferrari and BRM, Clark entered the 1964 British Saloon Car Championship and won every single class race he contested, taking the overall title outright. Think about what that meant for everyone else in the paddock. The best drivers in touring cars, specialists who did nothing else, were being beaten by a man doing this on his days off from beating Ferrari. And on his days off from that, he was back at Eddington Mains with the sheep. There is a wonderful contradiction in the image. The most naturally gifted driver of his generation, a man Ferrari could not buy at any price, spent that summer three-wheeling a saloon car around British circuits for the sheer joy of it, and winning a national championship almost by accident. Number 6. The day it took a 2-inch bolt to beat him. Here is the moment the establishment learned something chilling about Jim Clark, and it happened, strangely enough, in a race he lost. The 1962 World Championship came down to the final round at East London in South Africa on the 29th of December. The equation was simple. If Clark won the race, the farmer from Duns would be world champion in only his 3rd season, and Graham Hill and the mighty BRM operation, with all the weight of British industry behind them, would go home empty-handed. Clark put his Lotus 25 on pole. He led from the start, and by half distance he was half a minute up the road from Hill and pulling away with the title in his pocket. The race was, to every experienced eye watching, already over, and the title with it. Then, deep in the engine, a single 2-inch bolt worked itself loose. Oil began seeping out onto the exhaust, a thin trail of blue smoke following the green car around the circuit. Clark kept going, hoping against hope, but with 20 laps left, the oil was gone, and so was the championship. He pulled into the pits and stepped out, and Graham Hill drove past to take the crown. Now, on paper, that is a defeat. But every team manager in the paddock understood what they had just watched. The combined might of BRM, Ferrari, and every works team on Earth had not beaten Jim Clark over a full season. A bolt had. The only thing that stopped the sheep farmer was a piece of metal the length of your thumb, and everyone knew that bolts do not come loose twice. The reckoning was merely postponed. Number 5. The year he decided one continent was not enough. By 1965, Clark had already been world champion and had lost another title by a whisker, so he and Colin Chapman went looking for bigger game. They found it at Indianapolis, the cathedral of American racing, a place with its own establishment, its own heroes, and its own long tradition of sending European visitors home humbled. That May, Clark made a decision that scandalized Europe. He skipped the Monaco Grand Prix, the most glamorous race on the Formula One calendar, to contest the Indianapolis 500 instead. The American establishment had its own opinion about that, and about the funny little rear-engined Lotus 38 he brought with him. On the 31st of May 1965, Clark led 190 of the 200 laps and won by nearly 2 minutes. He became the first winner in a rear-engined car in the history of the race and the first foreign-born winner since 1920. We have told that full story in our Lotus 38 video, so we will not retell it here. What matters for this list is the context. Winning Indianapolis would be the achievement of a lifetime for almost any driver. For Clark in 1965, it was a side quest, because while he was conquering America, he was also assembling one of the most crushing Formula One campaigns ever driven, and that season was about to produce the moment at number 4. Number 4, clinching the title at the hardest track on Earth with a perfect score. The Nürburgring Nordschleife was the establishment's favourite examination hall, mile after mile of climbing, plunging, blind-cornered German countryside, where reputations went to die and where local knowledge was supposed to be everything. On the 1st of August 1965, Clark arrived with a chance to seal his second world championship, and he did not just seal it. he delivered what statisticians call a grand slam, which means he took pole position, set the fastest lap of the race, led every single lap from start to finish, and won nearly 16 seconds clear of Graham Hill after a straight fight at the most demanding circuit either man ever raced on. It was his 6th Grand Prix win of the season, and it settled the championship on the first day of August, the earliest anyone had ever clinched a world title, a record that stood until Michael Schumacher in 2002, an era with far more races and far bigger budgets. Sit with that for a second. A man who had spent the winter dosing sheep in the borders wrapped up the World Championship before the harvest was in, at the one circuit specifically designed to expose any weakness a driver had. The examiners went looking for a flaw and found a farmer with a perfect score. Quick pause before the top 3, because this is where the list turns cruel for Ferrari. I want to know which Clark moment you would put at number 1, so pause and drop your guess in the comments right now, because I go through the comments on every single video, and the wrong guesses are always the best part. And if stories about quiet British underdogs embarrassing the giants are your kind of thing, consider subscribing, because this channel is built on them. Right, back to the countdown and to the numbers that broke the record book. Number 3, the statistics that no amount of money has ever bought back. Individual afternoons can be argued about, so let us talk about the ledger instead, because farmers understand ledgers, and this one is merciless. Jim Clark started 72 World Championship Grand Prix. He won 25 of them. That is better than one victory in every 3 starts, a strike rate the modern establishment can only dream about. And he did it in an era when the machinery failed underneath him as often as it carried him home, which means that when the car lasted, he almost always won. When he set the record for most career wins, it stood untouched until 1973. His 33 pole positions stood as the all-time record until 1989, when it finally took Ayrton Senna to beat it. But the number that matters most is 8. 8 times in his career, Clark took pole position, set the fastest lap, led every single lap, and won the race. 8 Grand Slams, 8 perfect weekends in which every other driver entered was reduced to a spectator with a good seat, because from the first practice lap to the checkered flag, not one of them ever got in front of him. More than 60 years later, that record still stands. Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, with hybrid engines, computer simulation, and hundreds more races to attempt it, have managed 6 each. And even Clark's bad days read like fiction. At Monza in 1967, a puncture cost him an entire lap, so he simply drove back through the entire field, unlapped himself, and retook the lead before his fuel ran short at the very end. The establishment could match his budget 100 times over. Nobody has ever matched his numbers. Number 2, taking the crown in Ferrari's own back garden. The 1963 season was the year the establishment simply stopped competing for first place. The championship ran to 10 rounds that year, and Clark and the Lotus 25 won 7 of them, a level of dominance nobody had ever produced across a full season. He won in Belgium, in Holland, in France, in Britain, in Italy, in Mexico, and in South Africa, on fast tracks and slow ones, in the wet and in the dry, until the only genuine suspense left each weekend was the fight for second. And the sweetest of the 7 came at Monza, in front of the Tifosi, on the 8th of September. Ferrari's home crowd came to watch John Surtees defend Italian honour, and for a while it looked possible. Surtees put his Ferrari on pole, and the red car ran at the front, roared on by tens of thousands of the most partisan fans in the sport. Then, early in the race, the Ferrari engine let go in front of its own people. Clark saw off every challenger who remained, won by more than a minute and a half, and when he crossed the line, he had done more than win the Italian Grand Prix. He had mathematically clinched the World Championship at Ferrari's own circuit, with 3 races still left in the season. Picture the scene from the establishment side of the fence. The Scuderia, the most famous racing team on Earth, watching a 27-year-old sheep farmer celebrate a world title on their sacred home tarmac, in a little green car from a British factory a fraction of Ferrari's size. The Tifosi, to their eternal credit, applauded him anyway. They knew greatness when it lapped their heroes. And yet, If you think Monza 1963 is the most devastating thing Clark did that season, you are making the same mistake almost everyone makes. It was only the second most humiliating afternoon of 1963. The worst one had already happened 3 months earlier in the rain in Belgium. Number 1. The day he won by almost 5 minutes. This is the moment promised at the start of this video, and it remains, more than 60 years later, the single most crushing performance in the history of the World Championship. The Belgian Grand Prix, June 1963. Spa-Francorchamps, the terrifying road circuit Clark hated more than any other, with thunderstorms rolling over the Ardennes all morning and worse waiting in the afternoon. Clark had qualified only 8th, so the establishment lined up ahead of him, Graham Hill on pole for BRM, the grid stacked with works machinery. It did not matter. Clark swept around the outside of the pack at the start and was through into the lead before the first lap was done. Then the storm returned and drowned the circuit under a curtain of freezing Ardennes rain. Visibility was a rumour. Standing water lay across public roads that were taken flat out in the dry, and the fastest men on earth were tiptoeing. And through all of it, the gearbox on Clark's Lotus 25 kept jumping out of 5th gear at over 100 miles per hour in the spray, which at Spa was the kind of problem that killed people. Clark's solution tells you everything about the man. He held the lever in place with one hand and drove the fastest, most dangerous circuit in the world in the rain, one-handed, for lap after lap. Eventually, he gave up on 5th gear entirely and finished the race using only 4 of them. Any other driver on that grid would have called simply surviving those conditions a good day's work. Clark, one-handed, short one gear in blinding rain at a track he despised, put every other car at least a lap down except Versatility. Bruce McLaren brought his Cooper across the line in 2nd place, the only driver left on the same lap, and he was still 4 minutes and 54 seconds behind when he got there, almost 5 minutes. Ferrari's finest, BRM's finest, every professional the establishment could pay for. All of them either lapped or nearly so by the quiet man who would be back among his ewes within days. Nobody has humiliated a World Championship field like that since. It is worth saying plainly. On the worst afternoon, at the worst track with a broken car, Jim Clark was not slightly better than the best in the world. He was 5 minutes better. And when it was over, he flew home, put his overalls away and went back to the farm at Eddington Mains because the sheep did not care about Spa and the fences still needed mending. That was the whole secret, and the establishment, for all its money and all its engineers, never did work it out. You could not intimidate a man whose idea of pressure was lambing season, and you could not outspend a man who wanted nothing money could buy. 2 world championships, the Indianapolis 500, a British saloon car title, and a set of records that has outlasted every giant who chased it. The farmer's son from Duns beat them all, and more than 60 years on, the greatest names in the sport still speak his name. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing, and we will see you in the next one.